Hi everyone. Hmm. Aloha. I am Ramana Angel Heart, and I've been sitting for the last few months with a book that appeared to me, and unfortunately the cover fell off of it, but it's called Who Dies? Previously owned by some lady named Barbara, came came from the Temple of Kriya Yoga in Chicago, and yeah, I found this book when I was out of the country, and it's called "And Who Dies: An Investigation of Conscious Living and Conscious Dying" by Steven Levine. And I was so in awe when I picked up this book because I, at the time, thought I was about to go to India on a pilgrimage in the footsteps of Ram Dass, and he wrote the introduction to this book. And when I was reading it, I was like, wow, this really resonates with me. This sounds so much like Ram Dass. And then I got to the end and I was like, oh, it is. And then in the acknowledgments, I thought it was so beautiful that he says, the teachings and presence of Neem Karoli Baba and Ramana Maharshi permeate the sharing. And I was just like, wow, this book that just came to me has all my teachers' imprint on it. And I didn't know, like, why am I supposed to read this book about death? The only thing that I could think of is because in April I was supposed to do a death doula training with the wonderful, wonderful Bodhi Bee here on Maui. And I wasn't really sure even what being a death doula meant. I have several friends on the island who are death doulas. But for me, it was more of a chance to really be with the idea of my own mortality and to see what arises when I really confront that one day I'll be gone. And it was especially pertinent for it to come to me when it did, because I found this book the day of Ram Dass's celebration of life here on Maui. And I was in Costa Rica and I was feeling a lot of grief and sadness that I wasn't able to be a part of that celebration of life. And then to get to read his words was just so reaffirming, in the reminder that he's everywhere now. He's with me in this moment. He's literally with me in this moment. He's with me in this moment. He gave this to me last year. And just feeling all the feelings that come along with grief, and really experiencing grief in a way that I hadn't had to experience in much of my adult life. Ram Dass passing was one of the first times I've really actually had to look death in the face. And sitting with his body during the wake at his home was the most beautiful sense of profound peace I've ever experienced. It's like in the Bible it says, the peace that passeth all understanding. Yeah, this peace felt like nothing I could possibly put into words. And I went from crying and feeling a sense of distress and anger almost that he was gone, to this peace of recognizing that he's no longer in pain and he's no longer suffering, and he's back with Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji. And yeah, he got to take off his tight-fitting shoe and become everything. And that was so profound for me to witness in myself, that whole process happening, and being able to hold space for the grief that I've been experiencing since I found out about his passing. And this book, Who Dies, has been one of the biggest blessings I've been given. Way before I knew that coronavirus was going to upend all of our lives, it was a really personal exploration and investigation of me, for me, into what does it mean to consciously live and to consciously die? And that's why I've, for the last few weeks, wanted to, actually longer than a few weeks, since the beginning of February, I've been really wanting to share and read from this book. And then in the last few weeks, while everything with the coronavirus has really amplified, I realized the more that I've read from this book, the more I see how incredibly timely it is for us to investigate conscious living and conscious dying, and to be able to be at peace being alive in these times, and to be able to be willing to look death in the face and smile, and not be so caught up in the fear of the what if and all of the unknowns. So for the next, let's see, probably the next, 26 days, most of April, each day I'm going to do a video and read a chapter from the book Who Dies. And in this video, in all of the chapters except the one today, there are guided meditations that I will be reading as well. This book is by Steven Levine, and I've actually been feeling a really interesting sense of grief lately, that I didn't get to meet him before his passing. His son Noah founded Against the Stream, which was one of the first Buddhist groups I ever attended, and was really transformative in me getting onto my spiritual journey, and to realize now that his dad is the one who wrote Who Dies, and actually really has informed a lot of what I already know in my soul to be true, to be able to see that coming, just to see it all coming full circle now, and to see the interconnection between him and Ram Dass, and the timing and everything is so beautiful. So I'm going to start by reading the poem at the beginning, and then I'll read chapter 1. When reading this book, listen to it with your heart. Let it be a mirror of your own great nature. Understanding is the ultimate seduction of the mind. Go to the truth beyond the mind. Love is the bridge. Just letting that sink in for a moment. Love is the bridge. Chapter 1 is called Opening to Death. Today, approximately 200,000 people died. Some died by accident, others by murder, some by overeating, others from starvation. Some died while still in the womb, others of old age. Some died of thirst, others of drowning. Each died their death as they must. Some died in surrender with their minds open and their hearts at peace. Others died in confusion, suffering from a life that remained unlived, from a death they could not accept. It is as Lewis Thomas wrote in The Lives of a Cell. The obituary pages tell us of the news that we are dying away, while the birth announcements in finer print, off at the side of the page, inform us of our replacements. But we get no grasp from this of the enormity of the scale. There are 3 billion of us on the earth, and 3 billion must be dead, on a schedule, within this lifetime. The vast mortality, involving something over 50 million of us each year, takes place in relative secrecy. Yeah, this book was written a while ago. I think I've heard there are 7 billion of us now. Less than half a century from now, our replacements will have more than doubled the numbers. It is hard to see how we can continue to keep the secret with such multitudes doing the dying. We will have to give up the notion that death is catastrophe or detestable or avoidable or even strange. We will need to learn more about the cycling of life in the rest of the system and about our connection to the process. Everything that comes alive seems to be in trade for something that dies, cell for cell. We live in a society conditioned to deny death. It may be for this reason that many at the time of their dying feel so confused and guilty. Like sex, death has been whispered about behind closed doors. We feel guilty for dying, not knowing how to live. The ways of a lifetime are focused in our death. Those who live in what are called material societies, whose technology has allowed the acquirement of goods and left effort for survival, who have measured self-value by wealth, perhaps have a somewhat stronger tendency to identify themselves with the body. Our society spends billions of dollars each year on cosmetics, girdles, toupees, facelifts, and hair dyes, pushing away the lessons that the decay of the body would have us comprehend. Indeed, in a world where starvation is one of its greatest agonies, this country spends more than $400 million a year just to lose weight. Observing the body's decay, the change in metabolism as we age, the middle-age paunch, the lowering of energy, the graying at the temples, the lessening of muscle tone, the loss of hair, how can we deny the inevitability of the falling away of the body? Experiencing the loss of loved ones, seeing that all we have ever known is in constant change, that we are the stuff of history, how can we disregard death? How often, for instance, is one encouraged to contemplate the aches and pains of the flu as a preparation for death, as a means of melting the resistance to life? That's pretty fitting. Struggling for satisfaction from moment to moment, we think of ourselves as either fortunate or unfortunate, little realizing the teachings of impermanence. We seldom use illness as an opportunity to investigate our relationship to life or to explore our fear of death. Illness is considered bad fortune. We hold to models of good health and Pepsi-Cola vitality. We only think we are okay if we are healthy. But how, in this fixed idea of the acceptable, do we learn to open to the impossible? How do we allow ourselves to come into the unknown with an open-heartedness and courage that allow life its fullness? In the funeral home, we put rouge on death. Even in the casket, we deny our transiency. At home in our favorite easy chair, we read in the newspaper of 5 dying in a hotel fire in Cleveland, of 10 killed in a bus accident on the freeway, of 3,000 crushed in an earthquake in Italy, of the death of Nobel laureates in their laboratories, and of murderers in the electric chair. We partake of the survivor's news, reinforcing the idea that everyone dies but me. Sitting there reading the death of others reassures us of our survivorship, of our immortality. The misfortune of others makes up a large percentage of the front page, creating the illusion of our good fortune. Seldom do we use the news of another's death as a recognition of the impermanence of all things, that all changes as it will. Yet, the acknowledgement of impermanence holds within it the key to life itself. The confrontation with death tunes us deeply to the life we imagine we will lose with the extinction of this body. But what is the truth of this sense of presence we experience of the timeless being which seems to have no beginning, in which we sense no end? We imagine we will die only because we believe we were born. We don't trust that sense of endlessness, of edgelessness within. Our suffering is caused by holding on to how things might have been, should have been, could have been. Grief is part of our daily existence. But we seldom recognize that pain in our heart that one fellow called a deep weeping, a mourning for everything we have left behind. A friend, reflecting on the time her cancer had been diagnosed as terminal, said, "Being terminal just meant that at last I acknowledged that death was real. It did not mean that I would die in 6 months or even die before the doctor who had just given me the prognosis. It simply meant that I acknowledged I would die at all. In a society based on material gain, which imagines itself to be the body, which holds health so precious and fears death so much, it is often hard to understand that death is natural, even necessary, for the continuance of life, both inner and outer." In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there are long narratives that tell about the spirit of the deceased descending into the underworld, where it is met by the great judge who weighs the heart against a feather. It is the feather of truth, and one wonders whose heart is light enough to be measured against the truth. 75% of the population take their last breath in a convalescent home or hospital. Most die in institutions where death is considered the enemy. I have seen many approach death in physical and spiritual isolation, seldom encouraged to open past their imaginings and fears, cut off in heart and mind from the loved ones who might share this precious moment. Unable to trust their inner nature, removed from life itself, they enter with painful insecurity and confusion into another realm of being. I'm going to pause here because part of the reason I wanted to read this book is what I've been seeing on the news about how coronavirus patients aren't being allowed to see their families. And many of them are they're in the ICU, they're in critical care on ventilators with no sense of comfort or ease or anything familiar around them, except for the incredibly heroic nurses and doctors who are supporting them. But recognizing that they are not being able to be with their loved ones in this time where death is coming up and is right there at their face can be really frightening. So that's part of the reason I wanted to read this book, is so we can recognize now what's possible. And this sentence, the most die in institutions where death is considered the enemy, I recognize that to be what's going on right now. We're trying to keep people alive. We're trying so hard. And that's a beautiful thing to do. And how can we nurture and nourish the part of ourselves that has the fear of death, that knows that it is going to die? And how do we bring in an inner sense of calm and acceptance and of ease in the midst of that fear and in the midst of perhaps isolation in the hospital or just isolation at home, as most of you watching this are probably doing. So those are all just nuggets to think about. I'll continue reading. I have watched many cling desperately to a rapidly degenerating body, hoping for some incredible miracle, anguished by a deep longing for fulfillment never found in life. I have also met those whose death was an inspiration to all about them, who died with so much love and compassion that all were left filled with an unnamed joy for weeks afterward. Few participate in their life so fully that death is not a threat, not the grim reaper stalking just beyond the dark window pane. Most fight death as they fought life, struggling for a foothold, for some control over the incessant flow of change that exemplifies this plane of existence. Few die in wholeness. Most live a life of partiality and confusion. Most think they own the body. Few recognize it as just a temporary rented domicile from which they must eventually be evicted. Those who see themselves as passengers in the body are able to let go more lightly. In this culture, we look at life as though it were a straight line. The longer the line, the more we imagine we have lived, the wholer we suppose ourselves to be, and the less horrendous we imagine the endpoint. The death of the young is seen as tragic and shakes the faith of many. But in the American Indian culture, one is not seen linearly, but rather as a circle which becomes complete at about puberty with the rites of passage. From that time on, one is seen as a wholeness that continues to expand outward. But once the hoop has formed, anytime one dies in wholeness. As the American Indian sage Crazy Horse commented, "Today is a good day to die, for all the things in my life are present." In the American Indian wisdom, wholeness is not seen as the duration one has lived, but rather the fullness which one enters each complete moment. Unlike our culture, which encourages little preparation for death, in the American Indian culture, at the time of death, a naturally formed crystal is often offered for use as a meditation object. Gazing into the fissures within the crystal that creates the prismatic rainbow lines, one projects one's consciousness into the rainbow, letting go of all that keeps the mind from focusing beyond itself. At death, one is guided into the rainbow body, melting out of temporal form with ease and wise preparation. There seems to be much less suffering for those who live life in the wholeness that includes death. Not a morbid preoccupation with death, but rather a staying in the loving moment, a life that focuses on each precious moment. I see few whose participation in life has prepared them for death. Few who have explored their heart and mind as perfect preparation for whatever might come next, be it death or sickness, grief or joy. Who is prepared to die? Who has lived so fully that they are not threatened by their imaginings of non-existence? For it is only the idea of death that frightens us, and it is the unknown we pull back from. How often are we like the battered child on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, being carried gently from the room by the compassionate matron, who reaches out over the matron's shoulder shouting, "Mama, Mama," to the woman in custody between the policeman on the other side of the room, arrested for burning the flesh and breaking the bones of this child. How many reach back for the hellishness of the known, rather than opening into the unknown, with the patience and warmth that make room in our heart for ourselves and all others? In some societies, death brings the whole tribe or family together in celebration and acknowledgement of the continual changing nature of life. During these celebrations, often a deeply spiritual context for this passing allows many to have profound experiences of their own true nature. For these societies, death is a continual opportunity to let go of the illusions of life, to see it as it is, and to open in love to all about. In Hebrew culture, as in East Indian society, the body is most often disposed of within 24 hours. In the Orthodox Hebrew tradition, one sits Shiva for a week, mourning the loss with lamentations and prayers, yet respecting the passage of the other, wishing that being well in whatever newness may approach it. In India, the corpse is carried on a litter by the family to the burning ground. On the first part of the journey, chanting Ram, Nam, Satya, Hey. The name of God is truth. The family carries the deceased with its head still pointing toward the home it has just departed. Halfway to the funeral grounds, the litter is turned about so that the head no longer faces the life that just left, but instead approaches what is to come. At the burning ground, with the family all around, the body is placed on a large stack of wood and covered with flowers and incense and set ablaze. If the deceased is the father of the family, as the bones disintegrate, as the body begins to fall apart, the eldest son stirs the burning bones with a large staff, and if necessary, with a stout whack, caves in the top of his father's skull, so that his spirit may be released in joy to whatever realms await. In Mexico in November, there is celebrated La Dia de la Muerte, the Day of the Dead. Children buy paper skeletons and insert firecrackers to blow them apart, or eat candy skulls as the parents go to celebrate the nature of change, picnicking in the cemeteries that adjoin each small town. I've been with those whose death has brought them fully into life and strengthened their confidence in something sensed to be ongoing and untouched by the demise of the body. I have seen those whose lives have been fearful come to the moment of death with a new openness that allowed them a sense of completion they had seldom known. I have been with people at the time of their death whose pain and fear have so closed them that they could not say goodbye to those they loved most. So much business was left unfinished that they were all about bereft of the contact they so desired. I have also seen those who cried out, "God, not me," when they received a terminal prognosis. After a few months of deep investigation, quietly close their eyes and whisper, "Sweet Jesus," as they died. That's the end of chapter 1 in Who Dies. And my aspiration for coming here and reading this book every day was summed up beautifully here. I have seen those whose lives have been fearful come to the moment of death with a new openness that allowed them a sense of completion they had seldom known. My aspiration for all beings is that we may live our lives fully in the present moment, recognizing ourselves as timeless and eternal beings of love, and that we live fully in love and not fear, so that when the time of death comes, we can remain in that state of love, recognizing that, as Ramdas says, these are just our spacesuits. We're wearing our spacesuits for a time and then we take it off. I also love in the film Becoming Nobody, where he talks about death is like a tight-fitting shoe that you finally get to take off and feel the sweet release. So I hope that listening to this book will bring you ease and comfort, as it also invokes in you a curiosity and a willingness to be with all of your conditioning around death and all of the ways in which you are still clinging to the things that you haven't done yet, or the things that you regret, or the things that might have been, could have been, should have been, and see perhaps more clearly that you have the capacity within you to love what is and be present and hold with compassion all that arises. This is my prayer for you, and I will see you here tomorrow. Aloha.